So I saw that Matteo had little introductions for you, and prior to this interview, this panel discussion, I had emailed you all and asked you for a few little interesting things that I could share. Here he comes. I told him it was my fault. I told him.
I'm so sorry. I was doing my hair, you know. It's really important for a gay boy to have his hair to be perfect.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Hi, guys.
So I'm going to add some of my own little introductory notes because I decided, because I loathe these sort of long drawn out introductions, that why not entertain you a little bit with the introductions, and they're too juicy to give away or to not include, even though Matteo has already introduced everybody. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. So Elizabeth Carey Smith's first job was managing a paper route. These days, she's a design director who makes custom type for branding projects for a wide variety of clients. She has 26 letter tattoos that are in all various cuts of Garamond. Can we see one? Can we see one?
Oh, thank you.
26. And you might be surprised to know that there's a woman with her exact name, exact date of birth, a similar build, with multiple warrants out for her arrest in Boston. And Elizabeth has learned this the hard way. So we need to know, we need to find out about that.
Yes. Yeah. She's the cause of all of my bad karma.
Oh, wow. So Greg's first job was either at the city skate park or the city-run arts barn. And I didn't write back, but I was thinking to myself, how could you not know which one?
They were both owned by the city, and they just kind of shuffled me around.
Oh,
I obviously
okay.
liked the skate park.
So
Well, actually, no,
it was
that
an
fun.
and as opposed to an or, because in an environment like this, those words make a difference.
Yeah, I forgot to put the slash or just put it. Sorry about that.
And now he's designing typefaces. His favorite typeface depends on the project, and you might be surprised to know that he always forgets to bring his cup.
Yeah, always.
So we'll talk about that. Jessica's first job was as a library worker at the Orem Public Library in Orem, Utah. She started when she was 15 as a volunteer. Then shortly thereafter, she joined the part-time staff. She ended up spending her Friday nights and Saturdays through high school working at the library, checking in and shelving books, and was delighted to be a part of an organization dedicated to knowledge. Now she's an associate creative director on the brand team at Dropbox and teaches typography in the evenings at Parsons and Pratt. She doesn't have a favorite font, but for some reason, she frequently uses Stanley, a face designed by Ludovic Balland. And then we have Zipeng Zhu. His first and last job was as a designer at Sagmeister and Walsh. Now he's the self-described queen and creative director at his own creative studio, Dazzle. His favorite typefaces are Impact and his own font, Straight.
Because I'm so gay.
And he works mostly from his bed or his couch, and he thinks the audience here would be surprised to know he's single.
I was hoping for all, but that's okay.
So Zipeng, let's start with you. I went to your website, and you have on your website a very declarative statement that you seek to make every day a razzle-dazzle musical.
Shocking, right?
Shocking. So first, did you realize that when you'd come up with that statement that there were two Z's in razzle and dazzle?
No, that was completely out of luck.
Really? Really?
Seriously, I am a very strategic person in general, but that just came out from luck. I was born and raised in China, and I moved here 7 years ago for school at SVA. And then I was catching up on my gay knowledge, so I was watching Chicago, the musical. I don't know if you've seen it, and there's this one song called Razzle Dazzle Dum by Richard Gere, and then
Hum a bar or two.
Razzle Dazzle Dum, Razzle Dazzle Dum. That's all I remember. But and I asked my friend, I was like, what does that mean? And then he looked at me, he's like, it means whatever that's going on in front of me. It means me. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds great. And then I put it into my mission statement.
And that is how you became you.
Yeah, and I decided to really live up to my mission statement to look as razzle-dazzle musical as possible on a daily basis.
So I understand that when you first came to the United States, rather than make use of the double Z, Zipeng Zhu, you actually changed your name to Phil.
Yes, I did.
So I have to say that you're probably the most unlikely person to have the name Phil. Not that there's anything wrong with the name Phil, but why did you do that?
So I actually went to a British boarding school in China, and in that school, everybody is mandatory to have an English name. And I picked it because my Chinese nickname rhymes with Phil, so I picked it. And Phil.
What was your Chinese nickname?
Faye.
It doesn't rhyme with Phil.
That's the translation.
Okay.
When you translate Phil into Chinese, it somehow end up become my nick. It's the same letter of my nickname. So I was like, okay, I'll be Phil. So I was Phil for about 5 years.
And what made you decide to go back to your
Yeah.
given name, your biological
Yeah.
name?
So at first, being Phil, it's great when you first move to a country that doesn't speak the language that you speak, doesn't eat the food that you eat, and with all the new people that you encounter on a daily basis. But then at first I want to blend in as much as possible. I sort of have an American accent, and I sort of can communicate, and having an English name really helps in freshman college years. And then till my sophomore year, I realized maybe I shouldn't blend in. Maybe I should stood out a little bit more. And I realized my initials are ZZs, and it's in a lot of words like pizza, blizzard, jizz. Sorry.
Or
I
jazz.
try to entertain, because Chinese are not known for being funny, so I'm really trying to defend the stereotype.
I actually only thought there was one Z in that word that you mentioned, but that's just me.
No, it has two.
Okay, good. I believe you.
I looked up at the dictionaries.
Okay.
So I just decided to be
Which
really
dictionary?
good.
Thank you, Jessica.
Dictionary. So I decided to not to, be like any other people and just be myself a little bit more. And therefore I went back to my original name, Zipeng, which means an exuberant kid. Sounds pretty accurate to me.
It
And
does indeed.
So I live up to that name as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
let's talk about your relationship with Michael Beirut. No, actually, no. I'm sorry. You don't have a relationship with
That's
Michael
Jessica.
Beirut. Sorry.
The end.
Paula, don't say anything to Michael about that.
What might be knowing about
Let's
over
talk
here?
about Zadie. Let's talk about your relationship with Zadie.
So Zadie was a sustainable fashion brand that I was the design director of for 2 years. It was a startup, and we were trying to communicate the terrible effects that the fashion industry has on the environment. It's 5 times more polluting than aviation, just to give you some
How is that
context.
possible? How is that
Because-
possible?
Because across every point of manufacturing a garment of clothing, there is pollution. There's from how we source those materials to the water to dye to, and then not to mention all of the labor rights issues that go on in the fashion industry. So Zadie was trying to make clothing as ethically as possible. And what I loved about it, it went under because startup and fashion. But what I loved about it was that I was transcending graphic design and really kind of seizing all of this content and being able to take a lot of information that people just don't access or don't have access to, and trying to make it as accessible as possible to people who I mean, everybody who buys clothing, just so you could understand what the impact of your personal decisions are on a day-to-day basis. So it was wonderful because it was there was a lot of type because there was so much content. There was data visualization. There was art direction and all of the fashion photography. It was this really good confluence of all these things that I love. And I think, you know, a lot of times in graphic design, if you're just the graphic designer and somebody else is in charge of all the content, you start to get relegated into the person who makes something look pretty. And the idea that I had content that I could actually think about how to communicate all of that, that was really exciting to me. It wasn't just about making it pretty, it was about really making that accessible. So you get these like really boring spreadsheets from our researchers. We had all these great Harvard researchers on our team, and they'd say, how do we let people know this? And so it was good, but now it is gone.
Can we see your earrings?
There's just one.
Okay, so you have that earring,
I got that. My friend made these for the Women's March.
and then also I see on your middle finger you have.
Same symbol. Got this after the election. Eric, you're preaching to the choir. You know, we're all on.
and so you worked for the campaign, for Hillary Clinton's campaign.
I didn't work for a campaign. I did one of the buttons for
Okay.
the 50 button project.
And you worked at Bust magazine.
I did. I'm a lifelong feminist.
Okay,
yeah,
how has that? It was interesting to hear the question that Paula was asked about the role of women in design, and Paula and I are close to the same age. When I was growing up in the world of design, whenever I didn't get something, I never actually considered the possibility that it was because I was a woman. I always thought it's because of me. There's something wrong with me. And who knows whether or not it might very well have been because of something that I was or wasn't. But do you feel now that there are barriers that you are overcoming constantly? Do you feel that talk about some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really came to light after I had a child. I was the only person. I stayed home with her for a while and just worked for myself and freelanced and taught. And then when she was about 2.5, I started working full-time again. I was not the only parent in the office. There was one man, but it is still very different being a mother versus a father, particularly in a kind of fast-paced, hectic fashion advertising and branding world that I was in. And I handled it badly, I think, at first because I thought that the best course of action for me to be able to convince everybody that I was dedicated to the work was to basically pretend I didn't have a kid and not talk about her and not show pictures of her and try to get my husband to do things or get babysitters just so that I could prove that I was working as hard as people who didn't have kids. And of course I was working as hard as they were because I have great time management skills now because I have a kid. And so that I think that I went down the wrong path with that at first because then I started resenting that. And so then in my next job, I realized that in interviews, people will always say, because they truly believe that they are supportive of working mothers, as long as it's convenient for them. And of course, that it's never convenient. You know, my daughter gets 33 days off of school, not counting summer vacation, and she gets sick, and and I just have one kid. So navigating all of that ended up being kind of hard, and I realized by the time I went to go work for Zadie that I needed to stop asking and just start telling what I needed. And so in a lot of ways, as much as I've always been really strong and always been forthright and feminist and all of these things, I needed to just lay down the law. And then when people kind of tried to breach that, I could say, no, you're the one who said you wanted to be supportive of it, and I have to be supportive of it. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I recently did a photo shoot in San Francisco with prominent San Francisco creative people. And one of the people in the photo shoot was a very, very prominent young female designer who was just on the verge of being visibly pregnant. And she asked if she could please be photographed in a way that didn't show that she was pregnant, because after she had her last very public child, and very public about the pregnancy and the delivery, her business suffered significantly. And she stopped getting work because people thought she was too busy with her child. And so I think that's interesting. The one really exciting thing that I can tell you about, and I think Paula mentioned how many women are now in this business. In 2005, I took a summer intensive class with Milton Glaser at SVA. And in the class were 30 people. 27 were women, 3 were men. He'd said that 40 years prior, when he started that class, there were 30 people in the class and 27 were men and 3 were women. And so I do believe that we're seeing an entire sea change in not necessarily who is the more dominant gender, but perhaps in how the gender equity is being handled.
Sure.
So Jessica. So I have to tell you, I do Design Matters almost every week, and you hear edited versions of my interviews. I make mistakes all the time. So they just get edited out, and so I'm sorry that I made that mistake. But let's talk about your relationship with Michael Beirut.
Sure. I worked for Michael Beirut for almost 3 years. It was my first job right after I finished grad school. And I think everyone on his team will tell you that he's probably one of the best bosses in the business, because he gives you a lot of responsibility and ownership over the work that you do. I've kind of always looked up to him as a designer. I came from design studying English as an undergrad, so I was much more interested in kind of the textual before I was interested in the visual. But Michael's posters for the Yale School of Architecture was one of the first kind of graphic design series I encountered as a student, and kind of immediately fell in love with those designs, and it became just serendipitous and a huge form of flattery that I was able to design those with him while I was working there.
The work that you've done on the Yale posters are magnificent. I mean,
thank you.
truly, truly breathtaking. So I urge you to look at Jessica's website. You can see them all there. They are magnificent.
I mean, but it has been a series for, many, many years. A lot of
Yes,
designers
absolutely.
have
Michael's been
so
doing this work, I
got a
think,
small
for
slice.
several decades. But your contribution is noteworthy. I understand that your favorite book is Ulysses, as is mine.
Yes, I guess I can reveal myself as a true geek or bookworm on this stage, but yes, Ulysses is.
And one of the other books that I noticed you have a fondness for is a book from the 1700s called The Life and Times of Tristram Shandy Gentleman by a man named Lawrence Stern. So that is also one of my favorite books. So I would love to hear you describe what it is and why you like it so much.
Sure. So, I mean, this relates back to being an English major, but I think as I was studying literature, I started to become interested in authors who were really experimenting with typography, experimenting with layout, with composition, and even kind of the book as a physical object. And I was primarily preoccupied with 20th century modernists, not necessarily explicit manifestations of design, but more subtle, nuanced ways, and anywhere from Woolf to Joyce or Poe or Pound, where kind of through these kind of more subtle gestures, it influenced the meaning. But if you look at something like Tristram Shandy, we're talking about 18th century text where, to indicate a funeral, it's a completely black page, or, the marbled paper, and all of these kind of bigger moments, which are kind of meant to kind of interrupt this imaginative reading experience and kind of disrupt that and make the reader think about something new. And I think those kind of moments as I was, studying English, is kind of what got me started interested in typography and interested in design, and ultimately I kind of made the transition to be a designer.
I think that there is no modern book that utilizes typography in any type of inventive way that doesn't owe its early influence to Lawrence Stern and Tristram Shandy. In addition to a completely black page, there are blank pages. There are chapters with no words. There are words that are in zigzags. There are words that are in squiggles. And this was in the 1700s. So every modern book since that time, I think, owes its origins to that book. Greg, let's talk about, you're a very prolific type designer. Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I thought I had I mean, I've only released my own typeface recently, Robinson, of course.
Well, you've also
but-
worked on Les Jeunes, and you've worked
Oh,
on
yeah.
Publico italics. See,
Well-
that would be fixed in a recorded show.
But some of that stuff is just either production work or for Lejeune, it was just I did the stencil, which I just cut it up. Christian and Paul designed it, and I was just yeah, I'll chop it up.
So what would you say is the biggest difference between doing the production / chopping up stuff and designing something from scratch?
Probably designing from scratch is a lot harder.
Well,
It's kind of well, what's a worthwhile thing to make? That's a hard question to answer.
well, what is a worthwhile thing to make?
I'm still trying to figure that out, honestly.
So what about the rest of the panel? What would you
Yeah,
say
give me
is...
some ideas. I need to release
Well, no,
something
because this
next
is what
year,
Ed Ben
but-
Gett was talking about before. What is worthwhile?
Yeah.
What is worthwhile? I mean, one of the quotes that I didn't get a chance to ask him about was the notion that everything that he did, he'd always have to ask himself, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why does the world need another typeface? This is garbage. And he
Partly-
actually referred to his own work in that way.
Yeah, partly why I answered was the thing about my favorite typefaces, because I think that's important. I make typefaces, or I like to make typefaces that live within a context. It's not like I'm just making something that's just going to be its own thing. I don't think type ever, for me, is like that. It always ends up in a graphic designer's hands. It's a tool. They have to use it. They have to make some sort of graphic design with it. So I think that's kind of always important for me to remember. So it's just well, what's a new problem, or what's somebody, we do a lot of custom work, and that's cool, and people come to us with problems, and okay, yeah, that's interesting.
What problem do you think the typeface that you've personally designed from scratch has helped solve? That's a tough question, I know.
Yeah, because I started that when I was a lot younger. That typeface took
Is that
a while.
possible?
Well, yeah, I did in undergrad. I mean, it feels like a million years ago, but I
Greg's
just
only 12.
Aren't you all 12?
we're all 12. We're all 12 years old.
No age.
That one actually, I really kind of had a strong opinion about Lydian, and I still kind of do. And I'd always just wanted to make something that was a little bit more usable for myself, because I always wanted to use Lydian, but it's just you use it, and it's oh, that's that typical graphic design look. You looked at trend list or whatever. So I thought it'd be interesting to ground it in something that has a very solid proportion that we all know, like American Gothics and grotesques. That's an interesting idea, because before it's just calligraphy, basically, from Warren Chappell. But giving it a different structure, I think, kind of changed it. And I don't know, I think it gave it a new life, but maybe other graphic designers don't think that. But I don't know.
One of the things that I was struck by in doing my research on all of you was the fearlessness in which in the way that you have approached your careers. So the notion that coming right out of school, not that you even had a job with Sagmeister and Walsh, or that you had a job at Apple or at Pentagram, or that you were working at OCD, or any of the agencies that you've all worked at. The notion that you could get those jobs is what I'm really interested in understanding. And I think that for the young people that are in the audience, for the students that are in the audience, for anybody that's in the audience that might feel like they're in the midst of a creative block, talk about how your expectations about your life has influenced the decisions that you've made. So Zipeng, let's start with you, because you came out of school, you got your first and last job with Sagmeister and Walsh. How does something like that happen?
It was pure luck. I have to say.
Let's take luck out of the equation. Let's take luck and timing out. I don't believe in either, really.
Hear me out.
Okay.
So I was a graduating senior at SVA. There is a wonderful designer named Timothy Goodman, also graduated from SVA, and every year they pick 3 students. One is the best freshman, and a representing senior and an alumni to speak to a student that haven't attended this school yet. They were making up their minds. And Tim saw my work, and then he just forwarded to Jessica. And my graduation is on Thursday. I remember on Tuesday when I was taking my parents from China, just walking on Highline that Paula designed, and then just walking along, and I got a little email from the lady named Jessica Walsh. She said, "Do you want to stop by the studio Thursday or Friday? Just show me your work. Just want to hear you talk about it." I was like, okay, hold on a second. I just sat down on the floor at the Highline to read the email 30 more times, make sure I was not dreaming. And yeah, I graduated on Thursday, and I interviewed on Friday. I got the job. I started working the Monday after. Honestly, that's luck.
Okay.
I think that's luck, but
It's not luck. It's not luck. It might be some good fortune, but it's not luck. Who were your teachers at school that got you to that place?
So that was my backup. So I took Paula, who's sitting there right now. She's also the first boss that hired me as an internship, where we interned together. Actually, we lunch together all the time. See, it's all connecting together now, just like Stranger Things. Sorry, my brain doesn't really work. So I took Paula, and she teaches a senior portfolio class that's specially focusing on branding. At the time, I was really fascinated by branding. I just wanted to do branding for life. This is the career I set for myself. And funny enough, Jessica at the time happened to looking for somebody that is having a branding background, because they were branding the Jewish Museum, which became the project that I led. That also the project got me hired, and the project sort of put me in front of everybody. And she saw that, and also I did a project called The Fuck. It was just a poster series that using the word the fuck. It's like chill the fuck down, and like chill the fuck out, and like calm the fuck down. It's just like a ton of thing. And then the first sentence that she said to me, I walked into Sagameister and Walsh's studio, and she was sitting there, and she just turned around to me. It's like, "Isn't the fuck the best word in the world?" And I was like, "Sure." I was like, I don't really know.
Did she know? Had she looked at that specific project?
Yeah, she did, because she tweeted about it, and then like it went on the internet, went viral for a little bit. But because of that, I think we sort of connected. She needed somebody who has branding, but she also just found another person that liked the word fuck just as much as she does. It helps.
So, and this is something I'd like to know about. I'd like to know from all of you. Talk about your first day working for somebody else. What was that like for you?
I remember both for Paula and for Stefan, I had nightmares. Literally nightmares. My nightmare for Paula, it was, I arrived at Pentagram, I just could not find her desk. Nobody believes me that I'm gonna start an internship at Pentagram, but I was in my dream, I was like looking for her. I swear to God, I got a confirmation, but nobody's answering me, and also I can't find her. So that was my nightmare. And then Sagameister was, at that time, that's true that they didn't have an extra station for me, so I had to bring my personal iMac at the studio, like the ginormous, 36 inches iMac the first day to work. But I remember my nightmare, that one is I brought the case, but only the case. I woke up 6 o'clock in the morning. I was like, double check. I opened it up and then packed it in, and I took a cab to the studio. Yeah, that was my 2 first days. Just very hectic, scary nightmares.
Jessica, tell us about. So, when you got to Pentagram, could you find Michael's desk? And how did you get the job? Was it a Yale connection? How does one get a job with the best firms in the world the day after you graduate?
Well, so I had interned for Michael actually 2 summers while I was in grad school. I kind of did the repeat program and then was hired on full time. Also, the Monday after commencement. I think I first got the internship through one of my Yale professors, John Gamble. He's the university printer there. And Michael does a lot of work for Yale, pretty much has kind of touched every school and department in the university. So it was kind of the one place that I wanted to work over the summer.
And your first day, what'd you do? How do you show up?
My first day, he was not in the office immediately. He came in around lunchtime, and I was terrified to meet him. Absolutely intimidated, just because he was one of my heroes. But he's very nice and very generous and very personable. So I immediately felt at ease. I still have a case of imposter syndrome, just I'm never gonna be able to perform as a designer enough for someone like that. I continually feel insecure, but I kind of just keep plugging away every day.
So the 4 of you suffer from imposter syndrome? You all nodded and said yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I did not get hired at Pentagram the day after I graduated. I'm a lot older than all of you. I've been doing this.
No, you're not.
Well, I've been doing this for 15 years.
No, I
and
meant,
I did not come out of art school with this great portfolio that was going to knock everyone's socks off. I started, in-house at a corporation, and I tell my students this a lot, and I hope maybe this is helpful for other students to know that there is a trajectory that's actually a lot more middle of the road, and I would say that mine, it has been the result of a lot of hustle and hard work, and not to say that anyone else's isn't, but that it took me a long time to get my work even good enough to get those better jobs. And so with each job, I would set myself new challenges. I would teach myself more about type. I would practice. I took a lot of continuing ed classes to keep different skills up. And so that was a much slower burn before I got, because I also didn't go to school in New York. I'm from Detroit. And so all of it was much quieter and without fanfare. And the fact that I've gotten to where I'm at now is a lot of work, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of continuous study.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paula talked about it when she showed her diagram of power. I spent the first 12 years of my career in what I call experiments in rejection and failure, which is why I'm so fascinated. I'm endlessly fascinated by people that have the courage and the fearlessness to sort of just go, start from go. It took me 12 years before I even got a job that I liked, and then another 10 years after that before I really got any kind of attention for anything that I had done. By then I was well into my 40s. So I ask this with both reverence and curiosity about the sort of way in which the arc of a life unfolds. And I am solaced and get a great deal of comfort when I see Paula's chart and think, oh, well, if you are that wunderkind, it really means you then have that much to sustain over a lot longer time. So, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, but I do have to say, though, I did fought for my internship with Paula. That's one time that I really made my classmate hate me.
What'd you do?
So Paula wasn't teaching at SVA that year, but she did a little workshop. So they picked, 12 students, and then we all did a project. And I was supposed to do my internship at GQ that summer, and then they rejected me. And I was really bummed. I was talking to one of my professor, Gail Anderson, who's wonderful. He's like, oh, do you think I should ask for the internship at Pentagram with Paula? And she's like, why not? Worst come to worst is a no. And then that's sort of my life decision-making motto from now on. Yeah, it's okay to be rejected, but if they say yes, that would be fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And I sent her an email, I think 6 o'clock or something in the morning. 'Cause I remember I think I listened on Design Matter that she wakes up every morning to check her emails before she go to work. So strategic. So I sent her an email, I stayed up all night to perfecting my perfect PDF. And I did, and I sent it to her, and then she's like, yeah, come over in May. And then that's what happened. I think you just kind of have to sometimes ask for it. If you don't
Yeah,
ask,
I
you
mean, I
don't
think
get.
there's a very big difference between rejection and failure. And I think that I was talking to Seth Godin recently in my last interview with him, and he said that he felt that we were living in a failure, the pornography of failure. That everybody was talking about this fail fast and fail first and fail and all of these failings. And what I think that people mistake is that rejection is when somebody else tells you you're failing, you're not good enough. Failure, you usually have to decide, okay, enough. You sort of decide when you failed, when you stop trying. Greg, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I totally thought I failed immediately after I graduated undergrad because I had sent my then type portfolio to a program in the Netherlands, like one of the two that people actually go to at the KVK, and they're Dutch, and that's a very kind of specific kind of way to joke around, or just how they are. And I got an email back that was basically like, you're not good enough, you didn't get in, maybe try this other program that isn't typeface design. And I was like,
Oh my God.
and I was like, oh shit. And then sorry, Carol. But then I sent, after that, I was like, well, maybe I'll just try and get an internship at a type foundry. And I sent it to Christian, actually. And he was just like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm traveling. No. And it's really funny because I told him that story. He's like, oh, that's funny. Let me just search my email real quick, because he keeps all of his emails and found the email. It's very embarrassing. It's a very embarrassing PDF. But yeah, it kind of took me a little bit longer to get to where I ended up. It wasn't like I immediately graduated. It took a while, after undergrad even, to get a job that I hated, and then onto jobs that I hated also.
So talk about the jobs that you've hated. Talk about, I'd love to hear from all of you, one challenging experience you've had in design or in life, and how you approached it, and what you learned about yourself from that experience. Greg, do you want to start?
Yeah, my first job that I really hated, the first job I had, was in this really small studio, and it was two people, the principal and the senior designer. And they didn't tell me that as I was going to start working there, that the senior designer was leaving the next day, and I was supposed to fill her spot, even though this is my first job. And they were like, oh yeah, you know all this stuff. And I was like, no, I never said that. And I kind of was just trying to learn on the job with a principal or a design director or whatever that wasn't always there. His wife would call or something would happen. He would just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna come back later. And it was just do whatever. And I'm like, but you didn't give me anything to do. And he would just leave. And sometimes would come back, sometimes wouldn't. It was kind of just I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what he was doing. It was a weird experience. But it kind of made me realize yeah, I don't want to be in a situation like this ever again. I mean, you can't really foresee this thing, but yeah, it kind of just made me realize there's some flags that maybe go up early on.
Yeah, I once took a job that I really, really wanted, but the only reason that the person who was in charge hired me was because of his partner, who actually had liked me. He didn't, and so he gave in to his partner. But one piece of advice I always give my students, and basically anybody that will listen, is never, ever go to work for somebody that doesn't like you, because it never, ever gets better, ever. So, Elizabeth, tell us about a challenging experience that you've had, and how you approached it, or what you learned and what we can learn from that.
I'll speak more generally to protect my reputation.
What happens at SVA stays at
I
SVA.
think this is being recorded. I've had a lot of jobs, and they haven't all been good. But what I have learned is that all jobs suck sometimes, and sometimes you hate your boss, and sometimes that's their fault, and sometimes it's your fault. But the important thing that I've learned is that from every job you have, you should remember the things that didn't work for you or maybe for that organization and cache that away. I think a lot of designers have a goal, like maybe when I'm X age, I'll try and work for myself and I'll try to have my own studio. And all of those bad experiences can culminate into a way that you want to operate your own business. So I had jobs where I didn't like the work, but I loved the people, I loved the studio, I loved the culture. I just didn't like the work, but I loved the way that they managed clients. So the way that I manage clients now is a similar way. You know, I work in a spreadsheet. I go through a whip every single morning, and to some places that seems really tedious. To me, that worked. So, other organizations where the branding that you walk in that exists already that you have to adhere to, those guidelines that are already there, and there's no flexibility, that can immediately suck for your creativity. But the challenge of that is to try to work within those extremely narrow parameters and figure out how to make your best work within that. And so from each, and I'm not an optimistic person. I'm not saying there's a sunny side to everything. It's not necessarily that. It's that you have something to learn from both the good and the bad, and finding out what those challenges are and figuring out why they're challenging to you is probably the most important thing.
Talk about how you got your job at Original Champions of Design.
I was only there for a little while. I was helping out Bobby because Jennifer was still design director at Hillary for America, so they needed a type nerd. They call me the resident type nerd. So I have done a bit of lettering and branding systems for them. So Bobby and I have, and Jennifer have been trying to work together for years, but we've just always been on like kind of passing ships. So it just worked for a little while toward the end of last year, and I just go and hang out sometimes. They have ice cream Thursdays, so it's
awesome.
good to go on Thursdays.
And I have to ask, so you have 26 letter form tattoos. Any others?
That's just
This,
one.
that one?
And then there's an exclamation point just for emphasis.
And you just love doing that, don't you? And what made you decide to choose Garamond?
I figured it's been good for over 500 years, and I'm not going to last that long, so it's probably not going to go out of style before I'm dead.
Thank you. Jessica, talk us through a challenging experience. And also, I'd love to hear, if did you ever disappoint Michael?
All of the time, definitely. I can't think of a specific anecdote. The most kind of challenging environment that I've worked in to date was definitely at Apple.
How long did you work there?
Around a year. So I didn't stay that long because it was so challenging. And I think what I learned from the experience was there's a lot of layers of approval. And unlike my situation with Michael, where I would work directly with him and we would work directly with the client, and that client was usually the decision maker. At larger companies, and especially within tech, there's a lot of layers to get good design approved. And I think one of the things that I learned really early on is I prefer either being the designer or working with a creative director who will be willing to kind of fight and argue for their point of view. I think what happens a lot at these bigger studios or companies is kind of with each round, it kind of gets watered down and becomes more and more safe and, isn't necessarily good design anymore. So I think for me, what was important was working at a place where kind of I would be directly involved with decision makers or be able to present my own work.
Was it hard for you to resign at Apple?
No. I mean, I'm still working in tech, and I think it's like a really unique culture, one that you kind of only get a glimpse of from the inside, but I have no regrets.
And Zizi, what about you? One challenging experience.
Okay, I don't have too many life experience because I only had one internship and one job ever.
Well, it doesn't even necessarily have to be, I mean, even just coming from China and the challenges that you had in school and coming here and
Yeah.
acclimating and.
I mean, I definitely, I do have a story from Segmeister that it's crazy, but in general though, being a gay Chinese semi-young person, I feel like I'm being criticized from almost all aspects on daily basis. I experience racism now slightly, not so much, just given the political environment. I think people are getting a lot better, but the ageism, it's very extreme that I encountered. I
Can-
get questioned a lot. It's like, why do you think you're able to do this? Because you're only 26. And I get this question all the time. And it's not from my clients per se, it's from the peers and the people that I meet normally work in the industry or slightly older than me. This lack of trust just because I might slightly lack of experience. But that brought to my story is my second assignment at Sagmeister is to design a set. They had a project with Adobe, Sagmeister versus Walsh. So that was my second assignment, to design a whole set for them for a TV show. And I've never learned design set at school. I study graphic design. I make fonts and then push pixels every day. And now I have to work with 3D spaces. I mean, thank God from my class with Paula, I had a little bit of 3D experience, but just to think, I learned everything about how to work with cameras, how to work with the DP, director of photography, how the camera it's working with the set and how the color it's reflecting on people's skins and how the skin is gonna show through the camera. All these things I learned on the spot, and not like my boss is gonna quote me and say, "Hey, don't worry, take one day at a time. There's a timeline, there's a deadline, and we gotta figure this out." So I just, you Google and then you ask people and then you beg people to tell you what's the little tricks and the little secrets, and then you figure it out. And therefore, I don't really understand the ageism and the doubt on if one have lack of experience or not, because if you are determined, you will fucking figure it out. You will get it done. That's how I see it.
All four of you are fairly prolific on social media in some way or another. Not to the same degree, but I read an interesting article last year, and I'd like to talk to you about it. The generation after the millennials is being called Generation Z. But there's a nickname for this generation now, and it's Generation D. D for depressed, because this generation is living their lives so much online that they're finding that there's tremendous Facebook envy and Instagram rage and situations where people find themselves, rather than connecting with others, which is one of the reasons these types of sites and apps first became so popular, to now feeling isolated and ostracized, and as they're comparing each other, they're feeling that they're less than. So how do you feel about what's happening now online with the way that you have to present yourself, the way that you have to project yourself, how much you have to be showing that you do or know or be?
I just take myself out of that situation completely. I mean, I joke with
Good
my
for you.
well, because like my friend and I, we joke that like my Twitter kind of reads like a bot account, which I'm like totally proud of. Like I'm fine with it just being like this very bare bones, like my Twitter avatars from like when I first started, and it doesn't make any sense. Everybody asks me questions about it, and everything else like Instagram, it's just kind of like I try not to think about it. It's just, it's easier to take yourself out of that and to just kind of ignore everything, I think. I mean, not for everyone. Some people have to be so connected and involved. But for myself, it's easier just to like disconnect and not be.
But
a part
how
of it.
important do you think it is? I mean, there are designers, really remarkable designers of all ages in their 20s, 30s, 50s, 60s that I'm seeing on Instagram all the time or on Twitter all the time. And I'm wondering how important is that to you all to see that or to participate? Yes, please.
I would ask that question for all the crazy addicts out there. For me, actually came from two aspects. One is that I actually think it's more of my depression therapy to be on the internet in a way.
There is actually now doctors that are saying that they can tell just by how often you're online on your device that how depressed you actually are. I think that's really interesting.
Oh shit, so I'm super depressed.
But I
For
interrupted you.
everybody,
I interrupted you.
So I make posts for my Instagram almost every day. So I have a project folder for my Instagram. I think I made about 300 posts last year.
Wow.
And they're basically a little visual diary. They're either type-driven illustration, animation, or animated type, all that. Yeah, basically almost every day I make a post. And it's a good practice for my skills, but meanwhile, it sort of led me to document my life in the way that my profession really taught me to, visual communicating. But meanwhile, I think being a foreigner living in this country, and there's so much that's going on, and I actually can't really participate politically because I do want to be a part of society. But to be honest, I'm scared to go to the protests because if I got arrested, I probably would be banned from this country for life. And so I donate money, but meanwhile, I would try to make as many things as possible. I make posters, I make pins, I make all these things for other people to express out in the place, but meanwhile let my voice to be heard in a way. And I sort of think that's another way that I kind of have to have it just in order for me to feel a part of the community and then contributing something to the country that I really love.
Thank you. Elizabeth, Jessica?
Yeah, social media in the design community is something I definitely struggle with. And I mean, I only keep active Twitter and Instagram accounts, but I think in part I feel conflicted because I think to be an active designer, there's a certain level of kind of self-promotion that needs to take place, and I've never really liked that. And I feel like a lot of my favorite designers, the designers whose work I really admire, they don't even have websites. And I like completely admire that like unabashed, I don't care about promoting my own work. I'm gonna rely on this like network of collaborators that I wanna work with. At the same time, I know that like my work has been shared on Twitter or Instagram, and that has like led to certain commissions for work. And so like I think part of being active on social media is kind of being part of the design community and also receiving commissions for new work. From the art direction side, I regularly consult my feeds to see who's doing good illustration or who's doing good type design, and that's the way design is being circulated. So to a certain extent, yes, there are a lot of ramifications, but there are also like huge advantages to connecting with people across the globe with the work that you're trying to do.
I also only have a Twitter and an Instagram. I got rid of Facebook after the election because it's a fucking waste of time, and it's not good for anybody, and you know it. There was no social media when I was in college. There was barely the internet. I graduated in 2002, but we didn't use the internet the way we do now. So I haven't really felt that pressure because I feel outside of that generation. I would feel more at a loss, I think, if I were younger, because that pressure is very real, and I see it. But conversely, I was just talking to Greg about this. More and more, I spend less and less time in front of a computer because the computer does not give you answers. The computer just helps you make the idea that you should already have. And if you're spending 10 hours a day in front of a computer waiting for it to give you the answer and it's not, or it does, a lot of times, especially what I see with a lot of younger designers, it's because you're looking too much at other people's work, and you're using that to influence your work, and I don't think that that leads to very interesting stuff. So I actually, I work for 4 hours in the morning. I train in mixed martial arts from 11 to 1, and that helps me focus enough to come and sit down and make letter forms, which is usually what I'm doing, is drawing letters. But I can also do that in a sketch pad, depending on what phase of that I'm at. So my process has become more and more analog as I've gotten older, and it's made me not screw around in front of a computer. I wait until I have lots of ideas to try for when I do get back in front of the computer, and that has made a huge difference. Twitter is just the best way to keep up on type gossip. So,
Really? What are
oh,
some
yeah.
good? What are some good?
All the, yeah,
What-
And
what-
you just, if you're following everybody in the type community, you're kind of seeing what's going on, and you can chime in. And so if I'm prolific at all, I think it's like, adding my snarky 2 cents, as I'm often doing on Twitter. And Instagram's mostly my kid.
I was asked to ask you a specific question, and this will be my final question. Tell us, if you can, what your relationship to the Type Directors Club has been. How has it influenced your career? How has it helped you? How has it excited you? What would you like more of?
I raised my hand because, to be honest, being able to sitting here, I'm so sorry I'm late again because I honestly want to kill myself.
We
I
were
really
just
do.
early, so yeah, we were early.
I'm always late. But being able to sitting here is really surreal because I met Carol when I was sophomore year, and Carol is the heart and soul of TDC. She makes
Yes, she is.
everything
Carol
happens.
Waller. 30 years plus with
Carol
the TDC.
Waller. Everybody, please give her. And I met her sophomore year. One of my teachers said, "Oh, Carol at TDC needs somebody to help to just put the show together." And I was like, "Oh, I'll help." And I went there, and I has been there almost ever since. I joined a club. I go to every single salon every Thursday. I was there eating the cheese sticks and then drinking wine. Feels great. And then be late on my homework. But that being said, everything that I learned from school, it's great. But meanwhile, seeing other working designers that different studio practice and different artists to how they do their craft and how they consider a practice and how they consider a career, it's really fascinating to me. And I learned a lot from that, and sort of forms me and myself how I want to approach things. And so, yeah, that's highly, highly injected in me. So thanks, TDC. Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Jess?
Yeah, I feel like I've always been a very happy participant of the TDC because of all of the design organizations in New York. I feel like the TDC is kind of consistently, offering the best lectures and the best events, and ones that I'm kind of continually compelled to keep coming back to, across the board. I don't think any other organization compares. And I think for me, it's also just the community where you can geek out about type. It's a very specialized geekiness. And I think there's something really magical about conversing with people who share that same interest.
I mean, I'm on the board. But I'm on the board because I also have consistently been a member of TDC for a long time. Ina Saltz, actually, when I first moved back to New York after a 3-year stint in Australia, I was kind of sitting around and feeling sorry for myself, and Ina was like, just go to the TDC. And so I started going all the time, and just realized what a special community it was, and also that I didn't know shit that I thought I knew, and then you get to be around these people like shoulder to shoulder. It's not
Yeah.
it's not like the AIGA where they get these speakers, but you don't necessarily get to kind of go and talk to them or sit next to them or have a glass of wine with them. It's really intimate, and that was really important to me. I've met wonderful people and I've been so inspired, and it's just an organization that is unlike any other. So.
Greg, last one.
I actually, I helped out with one of the competitions because I was like broke, and like the job I was working at was like the owner wasn't really there. It was another situation actually. Same kind of, it happens all the time.
Terrible story.
But it was
The way the rest of us come to our careers.
Yeah, but it was a great opportunity because working on the competition, I got to see all of the work that was entered from all over the world. That was like the most like amazing opportunity to see graphic design from places I've never been to, I've never heard of, like from people I've never heard of, or from people I respected, and I got to like look at all this and be around it and help out. And Carol really like helped me like meet people within the type community, the graphic design community, and again, they also have like some of the best talks and events. So
Great.
it's a great organization.
Yes, it is. It really is. It's been an honor to be on the board as well. It's been a true privilege to interview the four of you. It's been an unbelievable gift of a lifetime to be able to interview Ed Benguet. Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, Doug and Matteo.
Thank you, Carol.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. I think that we have Matteo coming back up on the stage with a bunch of other folks. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.